1 month ago, I wrote up 5 descriptions of 5 different kaiju that I was going to work into an original story on the channel. I sent out those descriptions to my subscribers, and they all got to pick one of those descriptions and design what they think that kaiju should look like. Now for today's episode, I've gone through the hundreds of submissions that came in, and I'm going to redraw my favorite for each of the different kaiju. And of course, I'm going to show off all the other awesome stuff that was submitted, while telling a new story in my Multiverse Tales series. But there's an additional layer on top of this that I'm kind of excited about. Cause see, I realized since I've rebooted my old book series Multiverse Tales on PopCross Studios with episodes like Biomech Kayla and the Beast Chronicler and the Dragon Fusion Brawl, I've never actually taken the time to reboot the 2 original characters from Multiverse Tales, Alexis Jones and Sterling and Engeal. So I thought, even though today's episode is taking place mostly in the world of my kaiju episodes, and one of the main characters is the narrator of my kaiju episodes, this could also be a great opportunity to check in on Sterling and Alexis and see what their lives are like in the new rebooted version of Multiverse Tales. If you have no idea who I'm talking about, that's totally fine, because as I said, this is a reboot, and any episodes with Sterling and Alexis thus far are not canon. Except the D&D one, but that's not actually them, that's D&D versions of them, so it only kinda counts. Anyway, sorry for the longer than usual intro, let's get right into the story and artwork. Thanks so much for all the submissions, everybody. Now into the Kaiju Slayer. Let's go. Hit like, if you want. Subscribe, if you feel like. But either way, enjoy the show. Alexis Jones stepped out of her car onto the overgrown grass as she looked up at her old place of work. The Agency of Supernatural Protection was now little more than a storage unit, but she still found herself there every few weeks. Every time she saw it, nostalgia waved over her. Her life had certainly felt more exciting and meaningful back in those days. Of course, the time since had been a lot harder on Sterling than it had herself. She marched around the building having a clear image of what she expected to see. Her once partner in demon hunting, but still best friend, leaned up against a solitary gravestone, fiddling with a silly golden rock that he obsessed over far too much. It was a sight she'd seen all too many times before on their meetups over the last few years. But today, there would finally be a change. She rounded a corner and Sterling sprinted up to her excitedly, but then stopped about 10 feet away. "Alexis!" "Oh, sorry, that was loud. But Alexis, take this thing from my hands," he said, gesturing down to the golden orb shard he held. "I mean, I've been trying to take that thing from you for years now, but why do you—" She stepped forward and he interrupted. No, with your powers. Use your powers to pull it over to you." She wasn't even certain her powers would work on the thing, but she supposed it should. The object was like a quarter of an intricately carved gold bowling ball. It was likely to be made of some kind of rock or gem. She looked at her friend's face, and his eager grin was infectious. She hadn't seen him this excited about anything in years, so she held out a hand and activated her mineral magnetism. The orb shard shot from Sterling's hand straight towards her, but as soon as it did, the thing lit up in a brilliant glow. She leapt back and let it fall to the earth. From it sprung a cascade of thousands of tiny glowing orbs that hovered all around them. Each one had some variation of 4 runes over it that neither one of them could read. "Sterling, what is this?" His grin grew that much larger. "My powers activated it too. 4 years, and I never thought to use my powers on the flippin' thing. And look. He grabbed her hand and pulled her towards one of the hovering spheres that was blinking gold and red. He reached towards it, but Alexis yanked him back. "Sterling, stop! Do you even know what you're doing? Lucifer used that thing to make thousands of demons. How do you know you're not about to do something worse?" He tapped the blinking orb and it expanded into something like a hovering video projection of another orb shard just like theirs. But this one seemed to be buried in rocks and rubble. It was sparking and rattling, almost like it was malfunctioning. Diamos mentioned once that there might be more of these things out in the multiverse. That one might be doing something to another universe that they don't know how to handle, but we do. This thing may create monsters, but Dee used it to destroy them all too. What if we can help? Sparks of Sterling's eagerness were starting to sink into Alexis. She was still uneasy about this, but flashes of their old heroic lives rushed back into her. "You're sure you can get us home if we go, right?" He vigorously nodded. She rolled her eyes. "Fine. Let's go." Before she could even finish, he thrust his hand into the glowing image. The shard shot from the ground into Sterling's hand, and a blinding light ignited all around them. Their feet briefly felt to lift off the ground before touching back down on a rougher, rockier surface. When the light cleared, they were surrounded by destroyed skyscrapers. Smoke billowed above, and there were no people in sight. "Well," Alexis said anxiously, "I guess you were right about this place being in trouble, but what next?" Before she could finish, there was a loud stomp, and the earth rumbled around them. Their eyes followed the sound to see a colossal, crab-like golden beast, whose head reached the tops of the few still-standing buildings as it stomped around the corner and looked down towards them. It let out a gargling shriek as its beady eyes leered upon them. They looked from it to each other and simultaneously yelled, "Yes!" They were both ready to charge forward into their first monster fight in years, but then a figure crashed down to the earth before them. He stood up, nearly 7 feet tall, and looked down at them both, confused. "You two have weird reactions to stuff. You need me to get you out of here?" But he stopped as he noticed the golden shard in Sterling's hand. His eyes widened. "Where did you get that?" But they'd have to explain later. The earth shook again as the creature charged towards them. "We'll talk later, big guy," Alexis said, still eagerly grinning as she leapt onto Sterling's back. "Gotta work first." Sterling clipped the orb shard to his belt as liquid metal seeped out from his shoulders, then solidified, locking his bones in place. Fire then rocketed out of his palms as he sloppily launched off the ground, spinning a bit through the air as they soared upward. "Whoa!" Alexis laughed through the rushing wind. "How rusty are you? It's not my fault you're like 300 pounds despite being 2 feet tall." She bonked him on the head playfully. 5'2", and I'm 160 pounds of pure muscle. Now focus up." As they shot over the creature's head, Alexis felt a rush like nothing she'd felt in 4 years. The kaiju suddenly swung its massive tail, shattering a building top and sending concrete and rubble careening towards the two. Sterling kept forward. "You let any of those hit me and I'll drop you." She thrust her hand forward with a grin. "Who do you think you're talking to?" The rocks repelled out of their path as they got right over the beast's head. Alexis loosened her grip. "Enjoy the show!" She leapt off and reversed her power thrust. The falling rocks shot towards her and clustered up on her arm into a giant rock fist. She hammered it straight into the creature's massive head. Its body lurched down as it let out an ear-piercing shriek. She grabbed onto the frills on its head and hammered another blow into it. Sterling flew around, coming to grab her, but the creature swung its tail up again, but this time launched a cannon of frigid water from it. Sterling tried to spin around it, but he was too slow. It slammed into him and sent him hurtling out of the sky. Alexis thought he'd recover, but he kept falling. Distantly, she heard him yell, "It's too cold, my fire isn't working!" A wave of horror shot over Alexis, but she couldn't do anything for him from there. Luckily, their new friend intervened. The muscle-bound hero leapt through the air and snatched Sterling. With him, he leapt up onto a building near the creature. He laughed excitedly. "You should have told me you were kaiju slayers. Always awesome to have help." Alexis leapt from the thrashing creature's head onto the building with them. "Well, we're not exactly kaiju slayers, but I guess for today we can be." "Good to hear it. But unless you have rebreathers, you might want to stand back for a bit." Before they could ask what he meant, another roar, like a rumbling belch, rolled down the road, followed by a foul odor. The group of heroes and even the crabby menace looked down the street to see another beast, like a green, smog-spewing head, lumbering towards them. Their new friend pulled a small gas mask from his belt and stepped to the edge of the building. Before he put it on, he raised his head high and pointed at the crab beast. "I am Heath Hurricane Reynolds, the world's greatest kaiju slayer, and today you're my prey, monster." He leapt from the building and fell towards the street below. "Wow," Alexis said, watching him go. "He kind of talks like one of those guys from those Japanese mangas you're always reading." Sterling chuckled quietly, but didn't bother correcting her. Heath crashed down to the street, now with his mask on. He held up an arm to the green beast behind him and thrust it forward. Surprisingly, as if taking an order, the colossal beast opened its maw and fired a wave of foul green smog towards the crab kaiju. The cloud hit the creature and it instantly started to sway. Its eyes fluttered as its body twitched, working hard to stay upright. Heath's mask kept him safe from the smog. He bent down into a readied stance, and then a torrent of wind rushed up around him, swirling the green smog. He sprang forward and leapt off the ground straight towards the swaying creature's head. Through the mask, they heard him yell, Hurricane Hammer! He smashed his fist right into the creature's jaw. A shockwave of wind nearly blew Sterling and Alexis from the building as the monster fell backwards, crashing to the earth. Alexis and Sterling were ready to cheer, but then they saw that Heath too had crashed to the earth. He wasn't getting up, but his monstrous foe was still stirring. Alexis turned to Sterling. "We gotta get him out of there. Do you think you can carry him?" She leapt onto his back again. "He might be too big, and if he's unconscious, he won't be able to hold on anyway." The shockwave had cleared the smog, but the green beast was still lumbering up towards the crab monster, which was slowly picking itself up. They landed down next to Heath. Alexis tapped his face. "Hey, Hurricane, you good? What's wrong?" His eyes were fluttering as if he was fighting sleep. He tried to lift himself up. "I can do this! I can't fail again!" But his head flopped back down. He was unconscious. Alexis thrust a hand out and pulled a slab of building towards them. They rolled him onto it just as the crab beast was getting back to its feet and leering down on them again. They sprinted off down an alley with Alexis using her powers to drag the slab and Heath behind them. The crab beast lurched forward, but before it could strike, the green gas spewer lurched forward and slammed its massive head into the other. The two creatures began to brawl as the group ran off. They moved for nearly an hour, just to be safe, and eventually the rumbling of the earth had stopped. Soon after, Heath finally started coming to. They stopped, and he sat up. "Ugh, I didn't kill it, did I?" Alexis shook her head. "Nah, sorry, but that green thing might have by now." He shook his head. "The gaseous maw will probably just put it to sleep for a while. It's not really a match for the Hydra Tyrant." Once more, his eyes set on the golden orb shard on Sterling's belt. "How did you get that? The last time I saw it, it was buried under a kaiju." Sterling pulled the thing off his belt. "I think this might be a different piece from the one that's on your world." He glanced at Alexis, unsure of how to explain where they were from. She shrugged, but before he could continue, he stood up, still wobbling, and said, "Oh, are you two from another dimension too?" Alexis was obviously surprised. "You know about other dimensions?" He leaned up against a wall, rubbing his head. "You're not the first to come here and try and help. A group called the Sci-5 come by once a month or so to lend a hand too. Plus, some people think that all of these monsters are coming from other dimensions. But I don't know about that." Sterling stepped forward. "I don't think they are either. I'd bet that your world's version of this orb is making them. That's why we came here. On our world, this guy Lucifer was using them for years to make demons. Our friend Diamos, Lucifer's daughter, finally managed to take it from him and used it to kill him and every demon he'd created." Sterling's eyes dropped for a moment at the mention of Diamos. Lucifer still managed to kill her too in the process. "But we think we might be able to use our shard to fix yours. Maybe even wipe out all of the monsters along with it." Heath finally steadied himself, and his eyes darted like he was thinking. "Well, that's a good theory, but first we'd have to find a way to get to it." He trailed off as he looked at the slab he'd been dragged on. His eyes shot up to Alexis. "Your powers, are they to control rocks?" "Sort of," she said. "I can attract and repel minerals. Plus, I've got some basic level strength and speed and durability and stuff." His eyes widened. "That could actually be perfect." He pulled out some sort of long whistle from his pocket. "We need to get to a building top." One at a time, Sterling flew the two of them up to the highest skyscraper still standing. He was barely able to carry Heath. The guy may actually have been 300 pounds. Once up, Heath blew into the whistle, and they waited. After 5 minutes, through the clouds above, a creature soared down towards them. Alexis pulled a clump of debris onto her arm, but Heath was waving the creature down. "Don't worry, that's our ride." The beast flapped down onto a building next to them and stretched out a wing for them to walk onto its back. "Most kaiju are trouble, but some ain't so bad. Meet Dogbeak." The three heroes exchanged more information about their worlds through the rush of wind as they rode the soaring kaiju away from the city towards a vast mountain range. "A little over 2 years ago, my friends and I were on the move, living off in the mountains to try and stay away from all the kaiju attacks in the cities. By chance, we came across an object just like yours in a crater, shooting off sparks like crazy. It shot something straight into me and knocked me out cold. My friends dragged me out of there, luckily. When I came to, I had my powers. We didn't know what that thing was, but it had somehow given me some, admittedly pretty hard to control abilities. I can use a certain amount of strength and invulnerability per day, but if I overdo it, I pass out and have to sleep for at least an hour to recover. Plus, sometimes when I use it, it'll randomly shoot lightning or start tornadoes or even make it rain. But at least it's some kind of power. Finally, after a year of hiding out in the mountains for dear life, I had a way to fight back. From there, I swore I'd use my power to slay every kaiju that was wreaking havoc on my world. Not the friendly ones, obviously, he said, patting Dogbeak's back. Sterling and Alexis both nodded along, intrigued and enjoying Heath's obvious passion. Anyway, when I went back to try and get that thing, there was suddenly a mountain on top of it, but like a big, living, breathing mountain. It was like a kaiju had just spawned on top of it and was just sleeping there forever. I was never able to get it to move to find the shard. My powers just weren't quite strong enough against its rocky skin. I had theories for a while that that orb thing had actually made the kaiju on top of it, and maybe it had made all the other kaiju, but everyone had convinced me it was crazy. I mean, we know that some of the monsters are man-made, so how could that thing be causing them? Plus, some of them are on totally different continents. It didn't really add up. Sterling rolled his shard over in his hands. I don't know for sure. Diamos was always a bit secretive and vague about this thing and what it did and how it worked, but I do remember her saying that some dimensions are meant to have monsters and superpowered beings, and Lucifer had been using energies from those dimensions to make demons in our world. If the one that's on your world now is randomly shooting off energies from other worlds, maybe that's making it possible for these creatures to come into existence here. If we can get it to, I don't know, maybe suck all those energies back in or something, then maybe we can reverse all of the monsters. Heath nodded. Well, I won't lie, it sounds like a pretty big stretch, but even if there's a tiny chance it can get rid of every kaiju on my world, then I'm 100% on board. Alexis absorbed most of that information, but she'd never fully shared Sterling's obsession with other dimensions and the weird, baffling jargon and theories he had around them. She was mostly just enjoying how excited she felt to finally be back saving a world and fighting monsters once more. She turned to Heath. So what's your, Slayer count so far? How many of these things have you actually taken out? He glanced away, somewhat embarrassed. Honestly, none yet. Not alone anyway. When I've had help, I've taken out a few. But quickly confidence shot through him once again. But it doesn't matter. I'll keep getting stronger and gaining control of my powers and eventually be the greatest kaiju slayer this world has ever seen. Alexis stifled a laugh at his over-the-top eagerness, then looked to Sterling. But for the first time since they'd arrived on this world, he wasn't wearing his dopey, ecstatic smile. He was smiling, but it was a fake one that she recognized all too well as his upset but trying to hide it face. She didn't have a moment to ask him what was wrong before Heath interrupted her thoughts. Here we are. Their ride flapped down towards a jagged mountain that was slowly expanding and retracting. Alexis swung under their mount and carefully slid down onto its leg to stand on its paw. They hovered over what looked like the mountain creature's head. She knew her powers weren't strong enough to lift a whole mountain, not even close, but she may at least be able to wake it up. She thrust down her arm and activated her power, pulling with every ounce of strength she had. Dogbeak let out a strained bark as they were all pulled down towards the slumbering beast from the pull of her powers. Slowly, the head of the creature rumbled and slightly pulled into the air. Alexis's whole body tensed, and she felt like her teeth were going to shatter from how clenched they were. She pulled harder and harder, and only managed to get the thing's head a few meters off the ground. She hoped it would be enough. She reverse thrust and slammed it against the earth. Dogbeak shot up into the sky and they all watched anxiously. A grumbling roar shook the earth. The head lifted again, but this time on its own. Dogbeak flew up higher as the mountainous kaiju slowly lifted itself up. It looked up at them as it tiredly stood on its massive hind legs. It snarled at them, but its gaze suddenly went from them off into the distance. It snorted, then turned, and stomped off across the mountain range, away from them. That's it? Alexis said, stifling her exhausted panting. That wasn't so hard. But just as she said that, a shrieking roar swept across the mountainscape from the direction the mountain beast had looked before lumbering away. The whole group turned just in time to see a blasting mist of ice. It struck Dogbeak, and the creature, with the three heroes, fell from the sky. Alexis had been low enough to land unharmed, but she looked up, scared for Sterling. She saw him puttering through the air sloppily. He flopped to the ground near her and immediately shot flames around himself. One of his arms had been frozen and needed to be melted back. Heath landed down next to Dogbeak. He looked nervously at its frosted wings. "Get out of here when you can, girl. I'll handle this." He ran over to Alexis and Sterling as they all looked off into the distance to see a spiky, four-legged beast with a massive club tail storming towards them. Alexis turned to Heath. "Any idea what that thing is?" Heath nodded. "I fought it a few months back and lost. I knew it was in this area, I just didn't know where. It must have recognized Dogbeak and chased us down for round 2. Alexis looked at Sterling's partially frozen arm. "I don't know how much help we're gonna be. Ice is kind of our enemy. Sterling needs to stay warm to use his fire and liquid metal, and if that thing freezes over the ground, I won't have any rocks to work with. We've fought ice demons before, and it rarely went well for us." Heath took a breath and stuck out his chest as a swirl of wind rocked up around him once more. "Then you two find the shard. Today I earn the title of Kaiju Slayer." He shot through the rocks towards the monster. Alexis and Sterling both ran into the crater where the other Kaiju had been lying, and quickly found a heap of rocks shaking with glowing light coming from beneath it. Alexis used her powers to push the rubble off the second golden orb shard. Sterling, with his hand thawed and warmed, coated the limb over in metal and grabbed the orb. Its shaking slowed as he touched it, but it was still sparking. He looked at it with concern, but Alexis could tell that his mind wasn't solely on the mission. "Alright, come on, what's wrong?" she said, "and let's skip the whole 'what do you mean, I'm fine' bit. I know your looks, Sterling, something's up." He glanced back towards Heath, who was ducking under the swing of the monster's tail that shattered a mountainside. Even from afar, they could hear his overconfident laugh as he shot off the earth and hammered the beast's back leg, making it shriek and stumble. Sterling looked back at the sparking orb. "I know we have to try this, but I just can't help thinking about what Heath's gonna be like if this works. His whole life goal revolves around hunting monsters, and now that could all just vanish in a blink?" Alexis started to click that this wasn't really about Heath. Sterling finally said, "I just don't want him to become as aimless as I've been since we got rid of all the demons on our world, you know? It's not fun having no purpose." Alexis was never the best at pep talks, but in that moment she felt like the right words just spilled out of her. "Sterling, do you know why I'm currently in another dimension, helping save possibly billions of lives from giant monsters? Because of you. You did this. You found a new fight worth fighting for us. Does that sound like something an aimless person would do? If Heath's anything like you, which somehow he seems like he's even more determined than you, if this works and we get rid of all the monsters, he'll find a new goal to chase after, and so will you. I know you will, and you know you will too. Now, are you going to try to save this world or not? Because I'm willing to bet there's another 1,000 universes out there that could use our help after we're done here." She had a point. She had lots of points. Sterling's eyes leapt around as all her words sunk in. After a moment, he finally stood tall, and a confident grin crept back across his face. He nodded. "Thanks, Alexis. You gotta make speeches more often." "No thank you. Now do something with that thing." She stepped back as he looked at the orb shard in his hand again. He activated his flames on it, but it still sparked. Nothing happened. But then he glanced down at the other shard on his belt and noticed that it was pulling up towards the piece in his hand. He unclipped it and held the two close together. He held his breath and let the two collide. A golden shockwave shot across the crater around them. When it cleared, the sparking had stopped, and the two pieces were unified into a single object. Before they could celebrate, Heath shot through the air and crashed into the crater near them. He leapt up quickly. "I'm okay, I got this." He glanced down at the now half orb shard. "So you stopped it?" But the kaiju shrieked and stomped towards them. "Well, looks like it didn't get rid of them, though." "Not yet. I might be able to figure it out, but I have no idea how long that could take," Sterling said. "It took me 4 years to even figure out how to use this thing to dimension hop." Heath laughed. Don't worry, I can do this. He looked back at Alexis. Think you could give me a boost? She grabbed a slab of rock and held it above her, laying under it. Heath got on top. Ready? She asked. Absolutely. She repelled the rock with all her might, and it rocketed into the air with Heath on top of it. He flew hundreds of feet up, then leapt off of it, well above the creature's head. He cocked back a fist. Clouds above him swirled and twisted down towards him. I am Heath Hurricane Reynolds, and you won't beat me again, Kaiju. The creature swung its massive mace tail up towards him. He slammed his fist against it, and the bony weapon shattered to pieces. From the punch, Heath felt his vision fading and his body exhausted, but he forced himself to stay awake as he landed in front of the creature. With the torrent of wind still swirling around him, he lurched back. Then he sprung straight for the creature's head, once more yelling, Hurricane Hammer! He slammed his fist once more into the beast, and lightning exploded all around them both. The instant the punch hit, Heath passed out and fell towards the earth. His vision and hearing faded, and the last thing he heard was a gurgled roar from his foe. He came to 5 hours later in the dark of the mountain. A fire was lit in front of him, and Alexis and Sterling were there waiting. He shot up and looked around. Is it? Alexis nodded to the side. Heath stumbled as he stood up and looked down the mountain. Through the dark, he could just barely make out the shape of the creature, laying in a lifeless heap on the ground. Yes! As soon as he thrust his fist into the air, he fell back to the ground in a thud. He laughed ecstatically. Alexis and Sterling laughed along with him. But Sterling was still fiddling with this new unified orb shard, and not making much progress. Unfortunately, that's the only good news for now. I still have no idea if this thing can actually get rid of all the kaiju like it did the demons on our world. But my best guess is, at least now, it won't make any more new ones. That's at least a small step, right? Small? This is the biggest step I've taken in years! This proves that we can actually do this! He stood up once more. This world is one massive step closer to being free from the menace of monsters. He looked at them both. And if you're willing, I'd love to have your help finishing the job. Alexis and Sterling both looked at each other with eager grins. They still had a million questions to answer about the orb and the kaiju, but they were questions that they were both excited to seek answers to. It was an intriguing new goal to work towards. Alexis looked back to Heath. Yeah, I guess we could stick around for a while. Alrighty then. I'm always surprised how little story I can actually cram into a half-hour episode. There were a lot of plot points that I thought I was going to get to that I just did not have time for. But overall, I'm still pretty happy with the story, and I hope it all made sense. There's a lot of lore that I had to kind of cut out or condense to try and make the episode fit. But anyway, gotta give a massive shout out again to the submissions that I ended up picking. They came from RM Comic Arts 1, Salt911, Adriano, and King Manti. And this episode was so much better because I had these awesome original designs to work with for these kaiju. And of course, thank you to everyone who submitted. As usual, it was really tough to pick. There were so many awesome contenders. I hope I got everyone's submissions into the scroll. I did my best to get everyone's in there. I might have missed a few, but hopefully you saw yours in the episode even if you weren't picked. Now, of course, we gotta do the submission topic for next month, which, as I'm filming this, I'm just realizing that I didn't actually pick it before I started filming. Usually I have it planned a few days in advance, sometimes weeks, sometimes even a month in advance, but I have not decided yet. Let's just go with post-apocalypse. Have we done that? We've done a scrappy submission. That's not really the same thing. Yeah, I recently did a post-apocalypse episode, so maybe you can try fitting your character into my demigod post-apocalypse world or something from that episode. Or just a general post-apocalypse character. Maybe I'll write a story with a bunch of people's submissions, or maybe I'll just read out your lore that you submit. I haven't really decided yet. But yeah, post-apocalypse characters. I'll put rules and a deadline up on screen or something. That's next month's community redraw, I guess. Sorry about that. This episode took a really long time to make, so I'm kind of exhausted. And I still have to get Monday's episode ready. By the time you're watching this, I've already finished it probably, though. Anyway, if you enjoyed this episode, I highly recommend watching the other ones in the Multiverse Tales playlist. Multiverse Tales is kind of just the name of my original story episodes, and lots of the characters from that end up being narrators in my other episodes. Like the main character of the Beast Chronicler is the narrator of all my Dragon episodes. Lots of people know this, but we've gotten a lot of subscribers lately, so I figured I might as well say it anyway. Anyway, I don't know if I've said all the things that I needed to say for this outro, because I didn't really script it as much as usual, I just kind of jumped into it, but I think we can probably just wrap up the episode now. So that's all for today. I'm Christian Pearson. This has been PopCross Studios, home of the nerdiest art videos on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. Hope you enjoyed yourself, and I'll see you all in the next episode on Monday. What's it gonna be? I don't know yet, but it's something. Goodbye.